Welcome to TISConversations, where we discuss issues related to understanding life from a trauma-informed lens. I'm Heather Forbes with the Beyond Consequences Institute. In today's session, we're going to have a powerful conversation with James Moffett, an elementary school principal. So welcome, James.
Hey, I'm excited to be here, Heather.
So I have not talked to you in a while, and I know there's been so many changes in your life. I know you went back into being a principal, and I'm sure you had no idea you were stepping back into a pandemic year. So tell me how this is going and more about your position.
Yeah, I definitely wasn't expect to step back into this. So, I took that last year off after 5 years as an elementary principal. I did some consulting work and, I got to attend your conferences several times, like always. And I was missing relationship. Really, that's what it came down to. Personally, I was missing relationship with my own kids because when you're on the road that much, you're missing events that are going on in their lives. And so I have two daughters, 10 years old and 7 years old. And when you're booking things way out in advance, and you're signing these contracts, you don't know that, hey, that's going to be the open house night or that's going to be parent teacher conference night because those aren't even scheduled yet. So I was missing that relationship with them, but also I was missing relationships with kids in the building. And, when you're just consulting and traveling and visiting schools, one day at a time or even a couple days at a time, you don't get to build those relationships with kids and see the true effects of the work that you're doing, and then also relationships with staff, which has been even more important this year. And so I signed this contract. I interviewed for this job back in February before everything really hit, and then March happened and we shut down, and just even the transition into this position was made even more difficult given everything that was going on. But it definitely stretched me and made me rely more on relationships and the importance of relationships, but just innovative ways to build relationships in the midst of everything that's going on. So it's been challenging at times. Like, I'm right outside Wichita, about 45 minutes in Hutchinson, and we've been in every possible model of learning you can think of, where we started in person, then we switched to hybrid, then we switched to remote where everybody was learning from home, and now we're back in hybrid. So the stress of that on teachers and kids, and then trying to be the principal who's overseeing that and trying to be compassionate and caring has been a struggle in itself at times. And so now my biggest struggle right now is the relationships have really grown and we fostered those, and I have kids who really are understanding that there's people who truly care about them, and now it's trying to find that balance where I know that those social emotional needs, that trauma informed mindset is the most important thing that we can be doing right now. But at the same time, trying to balance, and not balance a 50-50 type of way, but try to also have some academic support as well for our kids who are struggling in that regard. So it's been, like I said, challenging, but I think it's definitely grown me as a principal, as a person. And I think it's also grown our teachers as well.
Well, I am certain if there anyone could do it, it was you, James, for sure.
I appreciate that.
So when you say that you foster the relationships, get us a little bit more into detail about that, because that's one thing when I am working with schools, and I hear you, there is something about being in that classroom versus being on the outside and consulting, which is more on my side, which I do miss those internal, deeper relationships. But how do you do this? Because when I'm talking to people like, well, we've got kids who aren't showing up, we've got kids who aren't doing this, and teachers are burned out. How are you keeping this all together? And how are you fostering those really strong relationships despite all the barriers right now?
Well, I think even before the pandemic, the word that people heard me use a lot was intentionality, and not just intentionality and accountability. And I think even more so now, those words are just magnified. And so, like, when we think about relationships, like, I know we like to think of them happening organically, and like that's always ideal. But there's two things that I really stick by. One, like, every teacher is not great at building relationships. I think that's something we have to accept. And so when we have that as the case, like, what are we doing to intentionally allow them to build those relationships, maintain those relationships? So for me, it starts with like a master schedule. So like, we really have to always look at our master schedule and decide, like, if I look at this schedule, where do I see opportunities for relationship? And not just the organic ones, where do I see intentional time set aside for teachers to connect with kids? And so we start with our mornings. And so, like, I've been one for a long time that I haven't believed in bell work. I ask people all the time as I was consulting, and even now, like, let's move from bell work to connection work and think about how we really start our days. And the example I give people all the time is, this is my 17th year in education, and my most successful days are the days that I woke up and I had good breakfast and maybe I had a chance to work out. But more so than that, it was the times when I got to work earlier and I was able to connect with my colleagues. I was able to check in and see how they were doing. I was able to laugh and just, smile and just start the day off on a really positive note. And conversely, the days where I struggled were the days where I woke up late, I was rolling into school at the same time kids were. I didn't have that opportunity for connection. I didn't have that time to connect with my colleagues and work on those relationships. And it was just go, go, go from the start of that day. And so when I think of it that way, I think about what we do with our kids all the time. And in traditional school, like we have bell work where a kid comes in and hopefully we're greeting them at the door. But typically it's like, hey, go sit down. You have to do questions 1 through 10 before the bell rings, and we're going to grade that. We're going to move on with our day. And think about the stress that puts on kids. It's just that go, go, go mentality from the start, which us as the adult, we don't thrive in that environment either. So if we can move from that bell work to that connection work of, when you come in the morning, like, what are we doing to allow kids to intentionally connect with their peers? What are we doing to allow kids to intentionally connect with their teacher? I think, one of the opportunities that has come out of this pandemic is like, we're serving breakfast and lunch in the classrooms. So teachers are having an opportunity to be there with their kids and have those conversations. They're basically breaking bread with kids. And so they're having those conversations and enjoying them and allowing them to ease into their day. And for us, beyond that, our first 30 minutes every single day is morning meeting or some type of social emotional block. So again, we're continuing with that connection. So that connection time, really, because our doors open at 7:30 for breakfast, and that social emotional block is from 8 to 8:30. So really our first hour of our day is all about connection, which has been amazing. So when I get to go into classrooms and see teachers, who are playing Among Us, and see teachers who are playing these other types of games, just connecting and getting to know their kids, I think that's powerful. And I think that's helped us in a big way. And at the same time, we look at the schedule after lunch. Every person in our building has a mindfulness block. And so we gave them a resource of all these different mindfulness activities that they can have. But I feel like mindfulness, when we think about that, we don't always think connection, but like, I think there is some type of connection to mindfulness, even if it's just me being able to connect with myself, to be present and in the moment and ready to continue on with my day. So that's the type of intentionality around relationship that we have to have. And for us, I do a read aloud every month, which allows me to connect with kids. I get in classrooms every single day, multiple times, allows me to connect with kids. Just for right now, like our teachers today are working on postcards to send home to kids in the mail. And one of the things I really share with them, I want this to be really genuine. I don't just want a Merry Christmas. I want, make a connection with them. And because for a lot of our kids, this break is traumatic in itself, being away from routine, being away from kids. And so I'm excited for our kids to get these letters in the mail next week, postcards from their specific teachers.
That's awesome. I love the fact that you said, make it meaningful, make that connection rather than just, okay, hi, bye, check. Okay, I got that done. Check mark. Let me go on to the next thing.
Yeah.
And when you said that, not every teacher is good at building relationships, how do you work then as an administrator to guide these teachers? Because it's not something that is taught in schools. It's all about academics, and that ultimately is the goal in education. But as you and I know, that the way to get there is through these relationships and the building and the vulnerability. I think one of the things that we have to be able to have is some vulnerability, because especially with our children been impacted by trauma, if you're not authentic, if you're not being willing to put yourself out there, they're not going to connect with you. So how do you work then with your teachers then from that perspective?
I think there's a couple things. One, I think we have to start with modeling that. Like, I have to be a model of that every single day. And so right now we're in the middle of I've always done this called the 12 days of Christmas. And so today is day 12. And so they get some small token gift, something of appreciation from me every single day, the 12 days leading up to the break. And so that's ranged from everywhere from like, they get Starbucks drinks, they'll get like they had a Chick-fil-A cookie, or they had an hour-long lunch, just something like, I know how hard they're working. I see how hard they're working. I want them to feel valued. I want them to feel appreciated. So that's one thing. But one of the days of the 12 days of Christmas is we do a card exchange. And so we created this postcard as a staff. And I said, hey, the goal would be like, if you could pick at least 5 staff members to intentionally connect with, just write them a really positive note, letting them know that you admire them or something to that effect. And then on the day, which was yesterday, that we do our card exchange, don't just put it in their mailbox. I want you to hand deliver that note to them and just stir up a conversation. And so for me, like, I wrote a postcard or a card to every staff member. And one of my very first superintendent, one of the things that I admired most about him was I got the job, I got called on a Friday night around 6 o'clock, I accepted the position. And then the very next day, my superintendent or new superintendent called me and we talked for about an hour. And what I was most impressed with, and he was probably taking notes, which is fine, but he was listening to the things that I was saying. When I talked about my kids, he wrote my kids' names down, I'm sure. So every time he came to my office after that, he was asking specifically, how's Arya doing? How's Ayana doing? And I remember how impactful that was for me, that he took the time to really know me and learn me so he could ask those specific questions. So when I'm doing these cards for staff, I'm trying to make notes of all the conversations we've had up until now. So when I'm trying to, not only just wish them a Merry Christmas, I'm trying to connect with them and make those personal connections. And I'm talking about how's your husband doing? And I'm using his name. How's their school year going if they happen to be a teacher as well? How's your wife doing? How are your kids doing? And using their names. So when I can model that, and then so we did that yesterday. Now we're following it up today with them writing postcards for their own kids. And hopefully they remember the connection that I hope they felt in the card that I wrote them yesterday. And they can use that as an inspiration to kind of make that connection moving forward. But also we have behavior screener. And I know everybody didn't love behavioral screeners. I like them if we do something with them. I don't want it to be something that we just do when we go through the motions. So when we did our screener at the beginning of the year, one of the follow-up activities was myself, my counselor, my social worker, we go sit down with every single teacher. We look at that screener and we come up for any of our kids who we identify as, in need of tier 2 or tier 3 support. We come up with a specific plan for that kid to get their needs met. And one of my biggest things is we're coming up with interventions that happen every day for that student. The first intervention has to be something that comes from the teacher. Because I want to get us out of that mindset of, oh, this kid needs support, go see the counselor, go see the social worker, go talk to the principal. Yeah, that first intervention has to be a teacher-directed intervention. And 9 times out of 10, that first intervention is something that involves connection and relationship. So those are kind of 2 ways that I hope teachers are seeing and understanding and learning the importance of relationship, but also what that looks like in action.
And I think that is incredibly empowering to make sure that that teacher is part of the solution, because you're right. There has been traditionally this fragmented mindset to say, okay, you go down the office or you go see Mr. Jones. I'm not dealing with that. I'm just doing this. And so to integrate that into that teacher's realm of how they can be part of this support is very, very empowering. And so how are your teachers doing? Because this is, as we talk about, the kids are having a hard time. I don't think anyone's talking about how the adults in education are really, really strained. I mean, this is so, so challenging. And when you talk about all the transitions you've had to make, and I'm sure coming into the new year, you're going to be making more transitions as well, as things are so incredibly unpredictable. How are your teachers doing?
I think, been doing this for a few years and really getting into the trauma-informed work. And I think this is the first year where it's really slapped me in the face where, this trauma-informed mindset isn't just for kids. This trauma-informed mindset is for the adults in our building as well. Because if we're being honest right now, we have lots of adults in trauma, lots of adults in distress, lots of adults who are dealing with toxic stress because of everything that's going on. And they're thinking about finances and they're thinking about health and safety of their loved ones. And so for me, I've really had to transition a lot of those same mindsets that I've been preaching to teachers to really bestow upon their kids. Like I have to really have that same mindset with teachers as well. And so I feel really strongly about like making people feel empowered, but making them feel valued and appreciated. And so what are the conversations that we're having? How am I checking in? How am I being transparent, like you talked about, and vulnerable? Because there was a post probably a month ago now that somebody tagged me in on Facebook, and it was so powerful because basically the premise was this principal's not okay either. And so I do think there's power in them knowing that, I'm struggling with this as well. And I do think there's power in, I really believe, like when I was consulting, the hashtag that we use a lot was love kids. And because I really think that's what it comes down to. And so in the big picture of this, academics are there and all these other things are there. There's a long list of things that we could talk about and check off that are important right now. But in the big scheme of things, I think it's all about loving kids, but not just loving kids at this point. Love kids, love others, love yourself. And so think about all the activities we're doing. We did one over Thanksgiving break where it's called Thankful Thoughts. And so for me, it's just about giving people opportunities to focus on positives, non-work related, They could be personal, just positive. So every day they just had to take a sticky note and they just wrote something that they were thankful for. And there was just so much power. There were so many days that I would stand at that wall and watch as there's hundreds of notes that are getting put up there over the course of these I think it was 8 days that we did it. And just, it was a really an opportunity for us to reflect and take a step back from the schoolwork or the what we assume is schoolwork, just the academics, and really think about the people work and the human connection and that type of work that we do. And so I'm always looking for opportunities to make people feel valued and appreciated. Anything that I can do to let them know that they're seen and that they're heard and that I value them as people, not just educators, but truly as people. I think that's helped us a lot.
I think it's so powerful that you said that this is not a model just for kids and students. This is for the adults as well. And it is. I think that if you're going to live this model in the classroom, you have to live it in your life. This is not just a technique that you bring in when you show up at school. This is who you become as well. So
Yeah.
my question then is, how are you doing? Because you're supporting students, you're supporting teachers, you're supporting your staff. How do you get fed?
Um, Conversations like this really help. So I think, the power of a professional learning network, that PLN, is even magnified more at this point when I can have conversations with others and hear them saying, you know what, I'm struggling right now. And I think the unique thing for me that I'm finding is, my previous role as a principal, I was working easily 16, 17-hour days every single day. And so you would assume that in the midst of a pandemic, you're working even more hours, but I've made it a point to work less hours. And I've been really intentional about that because I know when we talk about self-care, we always say that, you can't take care of others unless you take care of yourself. And that's become cliche almost, but it's so true right now. And so where I used to, take mounds of work home and work until midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning, like I don't. When I leave here, if I'm living and living what I preach to others, like family and that social time and that personal time is more important now than it ever has been before. So when I leave here at 5 o'clock, I'm leaving lots of times my computer here. I might check emails, maybe if I check email that night, but I'm leaving all the task and things here. Like I have a whiteboard in my office where I try to prioritize 1, 2, and 3. Priority 1, 2, and 3. What has to get done? I write it up there. And you know what? Like I just probably 2 weeks ago cleared everything off my list from the first day of school, my priority 1, 2, and 3 stuff. And I'm okay with that. I'm perfectly fine with that. Like my biggest thing is when we come to work every day, are kids safe? Do kids feel loved? Are teachers safe? Do teachers feel loved? If I can check off those 4 things every single day, it's a good day. And that makes me feel better about the work we're doing.
I really appreciate that you're doing that for yourself. I think this is so important right now. And again, you're right. It's such a cliche. Oh, you got to take care of yourself. Put your oxygen mask on first. But it is so incredibly true right now, especially. So tell us more about how your students are doing with the transition. I think one of the things that we don't understand is how transitional trauma becomes a lifelong challenge for students. And I do believe right now our students are experiencing that transitional trauma. And how are they doing with that movement between the hybrid and the fully there, and then maybe who knows, maybe completely all remote as well sometimes.
It's a struggle. I mean, if I'm being completely honest, like us being in 3 different models in the course of like 4 or 5 months magnifies that struggle even more. And one of the things our biggest thing is attendance. Attendance is rough right now. And so like, I want us to put a focus on attendance, but not traditional attendance. I want to put us a focus on like truly checking in with kids to make sure they're safe. Not checking in with kids like, oh, your work's not done, but truly checking in with kids. Are you safe? Are you okay? That's the first step. And if we can't do all those things, I mean, this goes back to everything we've ever been taught. This goes back to Maslow. This goes back to Bloom. If those foundational things aren't met, like nothing else matters. And so I know me personally, and like I know a lot of people disagree with me on this one. Like as we've been in this hybrid model, that means our kids are coming to school 2 days a week in person and they're 3 days a week remote learners at home. And one thing that, I truly believe is that means that we have the opportunity to affect kids in really positive ways, whether it be relationally or academically, those 2 days a week that they're here. We have to make the most of those 2 days a week that they're here. And those 3 days that they're not with us, like I want to check in and know that they're doing okay. I want to check in and know that I want them to know that they're loved and that they're taken care of. And if I use that and I leverage that relationship the right way, what begins to happen is it changes from the 2 days that they're here that they're doing something academically to maybe it changes to 3 days. And then maybe it changes to 4 days. And eventually for some of our kids, it does change to 5 days because they feel that connection. And we know, like Rita Pearson talks about in her Every Kid Needs a Champion, if we can find champions for all kids, like I expect teachers to do, will go through a brick wall for somebody that they love and somebody that they feel connected with. So it's about building up that capacity of relationship to get them to that point where even when they're not physically with us, they feel connection and a desire to check in. Now, one of the trauma-informed mindsets that I tell people all the time is it's our job to make kids want to be here. And the way we do that is we provide opportunities and experiences that are outside the box that make it desirable for them to be connected with us. If we're just doing monotonous, routine, paper, pencil, worksheet stuff every single day, they're going to check out. They're not going to want to be here. So this has really pushed us and stretched us as a community.
So as you're talking, I really understand that the impact that trauma has when you go through trauma, which is what we're definitely doing right now. When you have that relational support, the outcome of that is going to be so much better on the back end because you have that support. So I just want you to know that what you're doing, and I'm sure you know this, but I just want to support you and reinforce this for you, is that by having these strong relationships, like you said, when they're in the classroom, when they're in your building, they are being supported and loved. And so their ability to handle what is going on is 1,000 times more. What I always relate to is that in the Iraq war, what they found was the soldiers that were in the front line, when they would come off that front line, they wouldn't send them to R&R, in like the Korean War, they would send them away to give them some rest and relaxation. No, they would just bring them back behind the front line, support them right there in that moment, and then send them back into the front line. And those soldiers did better. They had less PTSD than the soldiers that were sent to R&R. So I think that by staying connected, no matter how if it's at home or if it's at school, that continual connection during a traumatic time. And I think some people are going to say, well, this isn't, trauma. Yes, it is. This is absolutely trauma. So having those relationships, you're helping your students not to collapse when all this is over. And I know we're still going to have that collapse at some level, but you're definitely decreasing that, James. So thank you.
Oh, thank you.
And so as I talk about that, what do you see? I think that we are all going to be back. I'm crossing my fingers here with the vaccine on the horizon, and actually not on the horizon, it's still coming out, is that we are going to hopefully be in the classroom full time by next fall and hopefully returning back to some sense of normal. What do you see as the impact in the future? If I could ask you to look at your crystal ball, what do you see as that impact that you're going to see with those students in the future? Have you even had a chance to think about that yet? You're just still in survival.
Yeah, well, no, I am in survival. We all are. But as I look ahead, what I would hope is the outcome is more resilient kids, more resilient teachers. I think that's the goal. Like, as we're going through something, are we building people up enough, not just to survive and not just to get through it for this moment, but to truly be resilient moving forward? And I think that's the goal. And if I can look for any opportunity in the midst of this pandemic, people ask me that all the time, what are the positives that are coming out of this pandemic? I think the biggest positive for me is more people at this point understand the need for social emotional learning than ever before. And so I think the struggle and what worries me is, because we do this a lot in education, we meet a need in the immediate time because that's the biggest need, and then we move on from it. I hope that as we get back to normal, whatever that looks like, as we get back to brick and mortar, as we get back to what traditional school kind of looked like, that we maintain this focus in this focus on social emotional learning, because that's what I see more people focusing on now than ever, more relationship building than ever. I hope we see that that's where we need to be and where we need to spend our time.
I totally agree with you there. I'm very excited to see that the awareness of this has unfortunately come through a pandemic. It's taken that for some people to see that, but absolutely, that's what our kids need, no matter if it's just normal life or a time like this.
Yeah, for sure.
So I'm gonna play devil's advocate here, because I think that we also have a lot of people that have not been able to see this even during this time, because I hear a lot of educators saying we've got to get our kids in the classroom, we've got to get them working, our kids are failing. I mean, you see it on the news, all these reports that kids are failing, and they are. But it's not about looking at just academics. I think the problem is by seeing these reports on the news is that people are only looking at the academics. So how would you have a conversation then with someone that says, well, James, you don't have time for this. You've got to get these kids back on schedule, right? They're behind on their test scores, or behind. They're behind. We've got to do more academics. So give me a little bit, if you were to have that conversation with someone, because I know that people need that to be able to convince people that we need the SEL, that we need this relationship model.
I think one of the things in Kansas, we have a really incredible educational commissioner, and he was, as we're redesigning what school looks like, and we had started this process before the pandemic. This has definitely moved us along a little bit quicker. But one of the things he did is he went out into every community in every part of Kansas, and he was asking Kansans, like, what do you view as a successful adult? Like, what are the traits that you look for in a successful adult? And he took in thousands and thousands of responses from thousands of people. And what he came back was that people, when they think about a successful adult, what they look for are those essential skills. Sometimes we call them soft skills, but we know there's nothing soft about them. It's those essential skills that really separate successful people from unsuccessful people. When I would go out and consult, I would always ask people, tell me the characteristics of a successful adult. Same question that he was asking. I never heard, never, and I asked thousands and thousands of people. I never heard somebody say they characterize a successful adult by somebody who just knows their math facts, or somebody who can just recall facts, or somebody who, I never even heard people say smart or intelligent. That's not what they viewed as a successful adult. And then at the same time, probably 4 or 5 years ago, I went to the Rigor and Relevance. I learned that with Bill Daggett, and he talked about these, how he had polled colleges and universities and employers and asked them, what do they look for in the people they either let into their college or the people that they employ? And they were 12 characteristics. And I've taken that since, and we call them the Power 12 here at my last school and at this school. When I look at the Power 12, it's responsibility, it's respect, it's contemplation, it's courage, optimism, initiative, compassion, adaptability, trustworthiness, loyalty, honesty, and perseverance. Those are the things that successful people have. And so more now than ever in the midst of this pandemic, if I can teach people those skills, those are the skills that are going to be long lasting and help them be successful adults. I think that's the message that people have to hear. Like, is there a balance in there somewhere with the academic skills? Yes. But more so, it's those soft, essential skills. And even as a principal, like, as I learned that, my questioning changed and I was looking to hire teachers. Like, when I was 30 years old when I got my first principalship, and every question I asked a teacher was mainly around instruction. And I think forward to now, like when I'm interviewing a teacher, I'm getting to know them on a personal level and how those Power 12 principles apply to their life. I feel like I can get somebody around somebody, I can help them become a better teacher instructionally, but I really can't. It's a struggle to help adults grow in those Power 12 principles. Those are things that we have to instill in them when they're young, and things that they continue to grow in and master as they get older.
Those are very, very powerful. So how has that, I love the fact that your administration is totally on board. And I have done a lot of work in Kansas and have seen what amazing results this is creating. How has that affected you then as an administrator, so that when you attend the other administrator principal meetings and with a superintendent, that's got to be a completely different climate than your traditional school district?
It is. And unlike you, I've had the privilege to be other places in other states and have conversations with principals in other states, and the narrative's different other places. But I think this is, as I've been around this in this state, able to have conversations that have shifted from pure academics to really looking at that whole child, which we've been saying whole child for a long time, but really not doing anything with it. So now as we're making that shift towards really focusing on the whole child, I see kids being more successful. I see kids that are, we're really, when I go back to that behavioral screener, one of the biggest and most powerful things that I pull out of that is the screener we look at, or screener we use, I'm sorry, looks at internal and external behaviors. And to be able to hear teachers have conversations about, wow, I never would have put that kid on my radar as somebody who needs support if I wouldn't have focused on those internal needs. And there is a connection that we need to be really studying and evaluating and helping kids get the support that they need.
I love that. This is just such an incredible time. I want to know and I think I saw this on your Twitter feed where you had the pandemic positive.
Yeah.
I love that. When I was doing trainings that are now virtual, I came up with pandemic possible. Like, what can we still do
Yeah.
during the
Yeah.
pandemic? So I love that as well. Pandemic positive. What is your number one pandemic positive that you have learned during this time?
I think, yeah, the biggest positive is probably the focus on SEL, but beyond that, the biggest positive is we really now accepted that we needed to change. There were some things in academics or in education in general that should have changed years ago, but we've always just kind of done what we've always done. And this has really pushed the envelope and allowed us to really think about instructional practices, relationship practices, connection practices. This has really pushed us and stretched us and forced us to make a change. And sometimes it does take tragedy, or sometimes it does take a negative situation to force us to make the change that we knew all along we should have been making.
Perfect. So as I round this out, are there any good stories you have? Any thoughts, any wisdom that you want to share?
um, I don't know. I don't know how much wisdom I have.
You have a lot of wisdom, James. That's why I'm talking to you.
I think, the biggest thing, and I've said it throughout this conversation, just love people. That's what it comes down to. Like, I really feel like the other stuff comes when we can build relationships and love on one another and just make people feel important. That's what it really comes down to. Yeah, it goes to parents and staff and kids as well, and kids especially. And I think more than anything is like, never allow this pandemic to detour the things that you know you need to be doing. It's going to make us think outside the box and look at things differently. Like, so I was one that was always, I was in classrooms every day, and I was doing read alouds in classrooms every day and having connection. Well, this is, I'm not going to stop doing that because it's important, but maybe I can do that through Zoom, and maybe I can connect with every kid every month that way. And just look for ways to just continue to do those best practices that you've always done, and don't allow the pandemic to deter you from doing those things.
Well, I have to tell you, you were talking, I just was reflecting back on my time when I was in the schools and I was working with students as a social worker. I did not have the administration support on what I was doing with relationships, because it was all mine were definitely very traditionally taught. And even the alternative schools that I worked in, it was all about behavior, behavior, behavior. And here I was off doing, relationship work. And I can't tell you what the difference would have been for me had I had a principal like yourself to work under, because I really had to create my own little bubble that I could do my work without that support. And I'm just reflecting as you're talking about how incredible that would have been to be underneath someone like you. And I really appreciate you and just love your strategy, love your heart, and love the work that you do. And I just want you to know what a difference you're making in this world. And it might be that one student, that one teacher, but the ripple effect that when they go out into the world, that what the people that they're going to treat and the people that they're going to connect with, and how different that's going to be. I just want you to take a moment and think about that ripple effect beyond just the right now, because I know you're in survival, and think about how that's going to impact really at such a huge level. So thank you so much, James. I appreciate you beyond words.
Hey, thank you so much. That means so much coming from you. I admire you a great deal. And as I started this work, probably the trauma-informed work years ago, 4 or 5 years ago now, maybe a little longer, it was your book and Jim's book and the stuff that really got me on the right path. Reading Help for Billy early on and connecting with you guys through conferences and conversations really gave me the support I needed at that moment, because I was in a similar situation at that point where I wasn't under leadership who understood this, but being able to connect with people who did helped me understand it even more and gave me the push that I needed to continue.
Oh, well, wonderful. Then it's mutual. Hey, I have a new book out, Classroom 180. I'm going to send you a copy because I want to keep supporting you as well.
I would love that.
Okay. Thanks so much, James. Have a great day.
Thank you. You too.
This has been TISConversations. I'm Heather Forbes with the Beyond Consequences Institute. For more trauma-informed resources, please visit beyondconsequences.com. Thanks for listening, and remember, love always prevails.